I should come on and do 5 trends as we are now within 2 weeks of the NBA season somehow, which I feel like just ended a week ago. 5 trends. We're going to play 5 favorites going backwards from 5 to 1. But before we do that, you've been on the sidelines for what, a year with basketball analysis?
Yeah, I've been taking some time off to myself. I put a book out called Hoop Atlas in when was that? May, during the playoffs. But yeah, I guess we have some news to share, Bill.
What was the biggest thing you felt like you missed out on just talking about? Just in the content cycle, what was the thing you're like, oh fuck, I wish I had a platform right now?
I think it was, the rise of your team sort of emerging from a team that could never get over the hump to the most dominant team we'd seen in a long time by some metrics, and clearly establishing themselves as the best team in the league ahead of the playoffs, and then just pounding everybody all throughout the playoffs. And so I think that Celtics run was pretty impressive. And I wish I could have had a platform to really share it.
Yeah, it's a weird one because on the one hand, all of the advanced numbers, metrics, everything was just like, this is one of the best teams, of the last at least 35 years. But the eye test wasn't totally matching it. And it was even confusing for me as a Celtics fan. But I think that the 2015 Warriors were like that a little bit too, where the metrics were incredible. And the eye test, we were like, I feel like somebody could take these guys. It just didn't quite match.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Nobody believed in that team. Ironically, the Nobody Believes in Us Warriors was 8 years before that. But that Warriors team, nobody believed it until the confetti had fallen. Your team, I think we were ready for that by the time that Mavs series had started. But it was like a 4-year arc to get there. And just and one of the sort of interesting things I think with that team is Brad Stevens has become one of the best executives in the league. But the depth of that roster they were able to put together really just was unlike anything else in the league last year.
So you're in Texas.
Yeah.
Wemby just dropped from the earth like an asteroid and hit that team. They put basically one of the worst supporting casts in a while around him, and he was somehow just holding them in some of these games. They end up with 2 more lottery picks. They trade one of them. But what is the Wemby Texas? You're in Austin, and Austin's kind of like the adopted San Antonio in some ways. The Spurs, they're going to play a game there this year. And just what is the Wemby Texas relationship like?
It's incredible. I mean, Wemby is the best basketball player we've had here in the San Antonio market for a long time, since Kawhi left. I think that's safe to say. Yeah. And he is the best prospect the Spurs have had, I would say, of all time. And I say that with all due respect to David Robinson and Tim Duncan, who are absolute icons and led this franchise to the greatest places it could possibly go. But it's very exciting. I think the Olympics bill this summer even increased it because, he brought Team USA to the brink of a huge upset in Paris. I had some of my friends at the Spurs describe it as the perfect outcome for the summer because he got close, he got a taste, he proved to the world that he's that good. And we're just getting ready for this rise, which I can't wait to cover, and I can't wait to watch from the front row.
Well, he had that last game. What did he end up with? 26? Playing some of the best players. He looked nervous in the first couple games, and like he was trying to do 90 things at once. But by the time we got to the last 2 rounds, it felt like he was starting to. It also helped that they got Gobert out of there, and that helped with the spacing. It seemed like.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he's the best, but he's the best defensive player in the world right now, and he's still
really.
growing.
You think that?
Oh, it's not close. I mean, I think he's this year. Last year, I think Rudy had a really strong case for Defensive Player of the Year. Don't get me wrong. But as we enter year 2, I think we're going to see that he is clearly the most impactful defensive player. At the end of the season last year, when he was on the court, his on-off numbers with the Spurs, they were a top 5 defense with him on the court at the end of the season. And they're terrible, like you said. Yeah. When he came off the court, they descended right back to that lottery level defense that we expected from them for the last few years. So he's already there.
It was fun watching him slowly figure out during the season how tall and unstoppable he was, and it's like, oh, it seems like good things happen if I'm closer to the rim. Oh, it seems like I can challenge everybody's shot and probably have an impact. And as he started putting the pieces together the last 20 days, I mean, Russillo, I think, voted for him for Defensive Player of the Year, which a few people did. I couldn't do it with being on a bad team, which is just one of my weird award quirks. But
Yeah.
by the end of the year, it did feel like he was the dominant guy. All right, give me trends. We're gonna go backwards from 5 to 1. Give me your number 5 trend that you're studying heading into the season.
Yeah, the offensive explosion in the NBA, Bill, is the scoring explosion we've witnessed over the last 10 years going to continue or not? There's some really interesting evidence suggesting it won't. But the last 10 years, we've seen just an insane amount of offensive efficiency growth in the best basketball league in the world. And I have a few stats that I think prove it.
Yeah.
It just jumped off the page. So that's my first one. Will this offensive efficiency explosion continue into 2024, 2025?
So give us a couple reasons why this has happened beyond the usual, everybody's just better at shooting from 25 feet than they used to be.
Well, everybody is better at shooting, but dude, what I'm about to say, I'll give you two that really just grabbed me last year and was like, oh my God. So the 73-win Warriors of 2015-16, they ranked number 1 in the offense, in offensive efficiency NBA, averaged 113.5 points per 100. All right.
Yeah.
That team last year, that number would have ranked 21st in the NBA.
Oh my God.
Just below the Chicago Bulls, the offensive juggernaut of 2023-24, and the Rockets. So in other words, the 73-win Warriors, not old school, by the way. We're not talking about the 90s Bulls or the 80s Celtics.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the KD Steph Warriors, the next year that broke the record for offensive efficiency in NBA history, that team would have ranked 16th in the NBA last year, below the Lakers.
Wow.
Darvin Ham's offensive juggernaut in Los Angeles. So that's how fast the goalposts have moved to where we are now, where we're scoring for the first time in league history, Bill, over 115 points per 100 possessions. And that is like the Al Gore inconvenient truth graph, the hockey stick graph. That's what the offensive efficiency graph in the Adam Silver has really looked like.
So reasons other than that the shooting got better, the pace of the game picked up. They did a couple rule changes for that, right? We got rid of some of those giant, tall guys who were just kind of clumsy and hogging up space, and the league moved a little bit away from those guys. And, I think the small ball thing was a little overrated the last couple of years, but at the same time, some teams were able to do it, and it seemed like there's more variance with the lineups. And then the only other thing I can think of is that we just had, for whatever reason, and this happens in Hollywood, it happens in comedy, it happens in music. It's not, for whatever reason, we had just more of a cluster of good players.
Yeah.
Like we just had more good offensive players than if you go back and you look at like 2013 and you just compare the creators versus like then, it just feels like we have way more guys. And I don't really have an explanation for that.
Yeah, I think a couple things happened. I think you nailed it. Everybody can shoot now. So in a league of 500 guys, I think about 400 of them can make a corner three. And I don't think we were saying that in the Grantland era. I don't think we would say, hey, there's 400 guys in the NBA, Bill, that can make a corner three in 2014. I don't think that was true. There was Roy Hibbert. We'll talk about him later. Those guys have faded out. You pointed that out. And then I think the combination of players getting sort of really smart and analytical on their own, and coaches really embracing it and just sort of spamming plays over and over again and just understanding how to run an offense. And then I think, again, your Celtics really embody this. When you watch Missoula ball, right? Like it is 4 dudes spacing the court, a guy with the ball. They can all shoot a three. Al Horford learned to shoot threes. So it's play selection, and then constant sort of analytical supervision of everything we're doing, what's working, what's not working, who's shooting well, who's not, and all that.
Well, we should mention you were working in a front office for a few years there with the Spurs as that was really shifting. And one of the things was the technology got way better. You could just look at every single pin down you ran, from January, February, March, and all of a sudden that's like this. And we didn't really even have that stuff in the same way, I would say 10 years ago, but it just seems like the intelligence went way up.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. And again, like every coach has a guy with an iPad behind him now telling him which pick and roll coverage is better, which pick and roll plays are better, who's shooting well from where.
Yeah.
And I think That's right. I think we just have a lot more information in the player tracking data than we've ever had. And these guys are using it. And then
Do you feel like the
defense
players are using it too? Because that seems to be another theme is the players are embracing some of this info now where I'm not sure they did 12, 13 years ago.
One of the sneakiest things that's happened is there's a machine called the NOAA machine in all the practice facilities. And it doesn't tell you if you made it or missed it. It tells you where in the ring the basketball went. So guys are knowing what the arc was of their shot and whether it was short or long or left and right. And certainly not all the players are using this information, but a bunch of them have become really competitive with each other in the practice setting to get better at shooting threes. They know what these sort of fancy machines can tell them. It's sort of analogous to the velocity revolution in baseball. Like when we were kids, only a few guys could throw 95 or 100. Now everybody can, in part because of this technological revolution in practice. So I think that's a huge part of it too.
That makes sense. All right. Did we hit everything on that or you want to move to the second one?
Yeah, the second one is sort of related, dude, honestly.
What is
this one, I can't wait to hear what you say about this. Physicality is back. And I think Russillo and I were two of the people who were shouting and moaning and groaning the loudest last winter about the scoring explosion and about part of that being officiating driven and player foul baiting driven. And one of the most fascinating trends of the middle of the year last year we saw was offensive efficiency actually went down dramatically between January and April of the regular season. That's not something we've ever seen before. And it wasn't an accident. If you recall, as players were scoring 70 over and over again and game scores were getting very high, Bill, a lot of people were complaining and putting stuff on social media. And then something happened. And you can talk to your friends or our friends in the gambling world, and they noticed it. And you can talk to friends who study the game really analytically. But the officials started, say, swallowing the whistle more.
We noticed it. I remember it was like the second Sunday pod we did after All-Star. And it was a topic for us because we were like, does these games feel different? What's going on here? It's like all of a sudden prison rules are back. And they never really wavered away from it.
The prison rules are back. I don't know if we hope so. That's what I wanted to ask you about. But Carlisle this week had a great quote. He said, predicting what it's going to be like this year. It's going to be much more physical this year. Games are going to look a lot more like FIBA than they did the old freedom of movement NBA. And so for those of us who watched the Olympics, look, I worked for Team USA in 2016. And one of the things I remember Coach K teaching our group and getting the guys around and trying to help us understand what the difference between FIBA and the NBA was. He's like, look, guys, in the NBA, the offensive player gets the benefit of the doubt. In FIBA, the defensive player gets the benefit of the doubt. And around 2016, something else happened. People like Lou Williams, people like James Harden started really cashing in on that benefit of the doubt a lot. And that drove a lot of efficiency we saw, especially from three-point shooting fouls and jump shooting fouls and a lot of shooting fouls that Harden would draw. So I'm really curious.
Tricking referees became in the mid-2010s.
It became in the mid-2010s. And it took like 8 years for this really to sort of have this backlash. And so I think this physicality thing, and like, look, this has real consequences. This isn't just some minor thing. If the games are going to be called differently, teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves or Boston Celtics with great physical defenses are going to get better. And some players and teams are going to get worse. James Harden, notably, I think would be on that list. And apologies to our Nuggets friends, like anybody who watched Jamal Murray play FIBA basketball this summer, if Carlisle's right, if games are going to look more like FIBA, some of the players are going to struggle in that environment.
Joker, I would throw in too, because Joker was just getting hit by a 2x4 for 4 straight months. And, his stats were around the same, but his 3-point shot was gone by the time we got to round 2, right? He couldn't make anything from 25 feet. Then it all of a sudden became, let's just take our chances. Go ahead, shoot that, and his 3-point shoot never really came back. And I always felt like that was the physicality that at least was a piece of it.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like our friends in the gambling world, like they're going to be watching this trend very closely because it's going to affect scores of basketball games. It's going to affect player props. It's going to affect voting for all NBA because certain players' markers are going to change. And you know, I think it's really interesting. The league is a really interesting point in the mid 2020s here. Do we try to emulate FIBA basketball more?
Yeah.
Or do we continue this like chicks dig the long ball philosophy of just letting scores and box score video game numbers become in real life numbers?
I don't think anyone likes it. At least nobody that's in my life or anyone I've talked to, that just these soft giant point totals that we can't really put into perspective with the past of the game. I don't know how good that is. But on the other hand, like I think it's going to be really hard for somebody like Brunson this year. If the game's going to be super physical the way they called it the second half of last year in the playoffs, you're taking like these, Brunson's 6 feet tall, huge offensive burden to begin with. But now also you're going to be able to bang him around a little bit. That's going to be really hard to do for 9 months.
Yeah, he did pretty well in the playoffs, obviously. But I'm really interested in how that's going to happen to some players and who's going to respond well. Like, is Jaden McDaniels now going to be like a very important Bruce Bowen type player for the Minnesota Timberwolves?
Do you think front offices were thinking about this as they made moves this summer?
I think a lot of people, when we started to see that downtick, and obviously rule change, they couldn't call them rule changes, Bill, because that's against league rules to quote unquote change rules in the middle of the year. So they had what they call points of emphasis added to the officiating. But yeah, for a lot of us, I think we're watching this from a personnel perspective and some players becoming more valuable than others with a new regulatory environment. And I will say I agree with you anecdotally. Nobody liked what we were seeing. Russillo and I vibed on it. You obviously. But the NBA at some point showed me some focus group data that pointed out that people actually just love more and more points. Give us more and more points.
That's good. The focus group data sounds great. Let's make everything dumber. Let's make our coverage dumber. Let's make the games dumber. Let's just get dumber. One other thing on that physicality thing I was thinking was that Memphis has a lot of the different pieces that could go one way or the other, right? Like they have Ja, who has always been a really hard guy to officiate because he flies into the basket, bounces off people, right? They're also like a tenacious defense team. And they have that piece. They also have Zach Edey as the big guy that's going to be really, really hard to officiate. And I'm just really interested to watch them this year. They're getting a lot of buzz. I was talking to somebody this week who was like, you really think they're in the inner circle of teams that could potentially win the West? And I was like, I actually do, because Ja was one of the 10 best players in the league 2 years ago. And if he's back and Smart's healthy and Jaren Jackson's healthy and Edey does what we think and Brandon Clark can come back, like I just like their team. But I'll be interested to see how the physicality stuff affects them.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ja, like driving, when he was playing at his best, he was an undersized, high-flying rim attacker. And sort of the Adam Silver era of the NBA, that's great. But in the David Stern era of the NBA, those guys didn't always get treated well once they got there. And I don't think we're ever going to see the Lambeer clotheslines in the paint ever again, or the Andrew Bynum ones for a more recent version of this. But yeah, I'm very interested. Like if guys are even just allowed to be a little bit more physical on the perimeter with players like Ja Morant, is he going to be able to get to the paint? I think that's one of the areas we should watch for sure, Bill. And Zach Edey, favorite to win Rookie of the Year. Obviously,
justified. I think you could argue he's going to have the most impact on a team that's decent or better. But I'm sure there's going to be somebody who's awesome that we're not seeing.
They're the hardest team to predict in the NBA, in my opinion. And he's hard to predict himself because I just don't know. I don't know if it's going to work on defense, if he's fast enough laterally to stay in front of Stephen Curry or Fred Van
Well, you're
Fleet.
not invited on Edey Island. Not sending you an invite.
All right,
we're building property down there. You're not going to get the brochure.
I'll be.
I think he's going to be really good. I think he's going to be an absolute bitch to guard.
Do you really?
And I do. I think he's got good hands and size and good footwork, and he's just awkward. He makes every free throw.
Yeah,
I think he's going to be a weapon. He's just weird. We haven't had a guy like that in a long time. Do your third best trend?
Parity. parity, parity, and parity. And your team might ruin this, but there's some incredible numbers. And as the internet's resident basketball historian, Bill, you know that this league has been driven by dynasties and legendary runs.
Top heavy is always the best.
Yeah, Boston, Los Angeles in the 80s, the Shaq and Kobe Lakers in 2000, the Spurs, they sort of split that. Obviously, Jordan in the 90s. LeBron goes to the finals 8 years in a row last decade. Right. The Warriors always in the finals. It got kind of annoying. This year, we're not seeing, this decade, we're not seeing that. We have had 5 straight years in the West with 5 different champions. Your Crazy. Team, the Boston Celtics, and the Miami Heat are the only team halfway through the 2020s that have been to the finals more than once. This is very unusual, and this is an interesting trend. And it's not an accidental trend. It's been engineered by the league office with the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah,
parity is being engineered. And I think going into the second half of this decade, specifically this season, it'll be interesting to see if it continues. But it's undeniably one of the dominant trends of the 2020s. And I think there's 2 teams that have a chance to end it.
Let me guess.
Guess.
Celtics, because you cheated on that. Or you tipped that off already.
Yeah.
OKC has to be the other one.
Yeah. I think OKC could go on a run where they're winning the West 3 of the next 5 years, 4 of the next 5 years.
I feel like they could, especially if this Clippers picks hits, which is the underrated NBA story right now, is they could just swap with the Clips, who have the 3rd worst odds in the West right now to make the playoffs, on top of all the other assets they have. They just have the ability to keep either doing those Giddy Caruso type trades or kind of going all in with these different picks and just upgrading at spots when they need somebody. It's like, let's get a way better Lou Dort. Here's 2 picks. Here's Lou Dort. Give us a better version of him.
So I think Brad Stevens and Sam Presti both deserve credit for winning the early era of the new CBA regime. Like this new time, they've positioned themselves very well. But you're right. The only reason I would only say 3 of the next 5 is I have so much respect for the other teams in that conference.
And the Wemby shadow.
Wemby coming, obviously.
If he's the best player in the league a year from now. Luka, Jokic, they're most of the best players in the league are on that side of the league.
And Minnesota, let's not forget. Like there's a lot of there always has been competition. The West has been a bear. Like LeBron would not have made the finals 8 years in a row if he's in the West.
You're right. The more we're talking this out, if you're going to say next 5 years, Western Conference titles, OKC over under 2.5. It's a pretty good argument. I would go over because I think these Clipper picks are going to be like freaking almost like their version of what the Celtics had from the KG trade in the mid 2010s. They're just going to get all of a sudden these incredible picks on top of all the guys they already have.
Yeah, and they draft well. They don't screw up the draft. And then obviously they can stack a bunch of those together, as you said, to either get incredible role players like we've just seen them add with Caruso and Hartenstein here, which is just unfair, or to go get another superstar. Like if Kevin Durant wants the symbolic sort of return home, they are the one team that's positioned to be like, we could actually do this pretty easily. So I think there's a couple of tools in their toolbox that they have that nobody else has, on top of arguably the deepest roster in the West right now.
I got to give a shout out to the Knicks because the more information that came out about the trade they made, like we did this Saturday pod, we didn't even know all the details. We're just reacting to what that is as a basketball thing. And even Mahoney and I did Tuesday. But then once the trade was official, all their cap mechanics that they did where they gave the 3 guys slightly over the minimum. The big reaction we had on Saturday when I talked to Austin was about why now? Why not wait? This trade would be here. And as you read about it, it's like, the reason it's why now is because once the season started, the trade is gone. They have really no salary cap ability to make a trade like this unless Mitchell Robinson was in it. Mm-hmm. And from all the reporting, it was like the Knicks were offering, it seems like they were offering Randall and Robinson for 2 straight months. Hey, any word on the Randall Robinson offer? And Tim Connelly's like, nope. And then finally they bent and put DiVincenzo in. But I thought that was really interesting. But it really seems like they played it smart. If you look at, I was talking to Jason Concepcion about this today. Like, if you just look at what they did from from a higher up level, just the stupidest version of it. It's like they just made 2-2-for-1 trades and then traded a bunch of picks, God only knows, for Bridges. And that's the kind of stuff you're not allowed to do in a fantasy league or on 2K.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up getting 3 players for all these other assets. So I still think Towns is a 50-50, but you got to hand it to him. I'm kind of moving toward their vision for it. It took like 5 days.
It's risky. Obviously,
it's super risky.
Yeah, it's risky. I don't know if I trust Towns in New York. I don't know if I trust him as the primary defender in the interior of your basketball court, which is something he didn't have to do in Minnesota.
Or to stay healthy. I mean, the injury stats with him are pretty alarming. But I get it. There's a million things we could point to, but talent-wise, if they're trying out those 5 and all those guys are healthy and Towns doesn't self-combust in New York, like, I get it. It's just the flip side of that if it doesn't work out. But, I get why they did it.
I get why they did it. Minnesota did it. I can see why Minnesota did it too, clearing the decks off of that second or third big contract. And sort of opening it up, because I think Randall comes off with an option as soon as the end of this year, depending on if he takes his option.
I don't know if you have any of these people in your life, but there's a couple Knicks fans in my life now who are like, this Randall stuff's ridiculous. Randall's good. He's fucking tough as hell. People don't realize like this guy was second team All-NBA. It's not like this was some bozo that got thrown in. This guy's a really good basketball player. And now he has a chip on his shoulder and just please don't undersell the Randall piece of this. I want to see it. I think the spacing is going to be super weird, but he was on pace to make All-NBA 3 years in a row.
Yeah, and the way I look at the game analytically, he is one of the more enigmatic guys to pin down, because one year he is unquestionably a great offensive player, and then the next year his shot just goes away, and he takes really tough shots sometimes, and he's just a hard guy to pin down. I think we're going to see the best version of him for the point you just made. He seems like a guy who will play better with a chip on his shoulder. He seems like a guy who will be able to channel that into an I told you so sort of season. And I think
also a physical guy. Going back to your physicality point, like super physical. This is the way the league is now is good for him.
Great passer. I feel like that team got a personality transplant, and I feel like he's going to make them tougher in a way with Carl going out and him coming in. I think that's good for Minnesota too. And I think it has a chance to really vibe with Ant. And I think that culture in Jaden McDaniels and really sort of coalesce into a really gritty, tough group, a defensive-minded group. And Tim Conley could win this trade. He could.
So you mentioned the parity piece, and then we'll move on. But I agree with you at the top. There's more contender parity than we've had in a long time. Usually there's somebody, even if you go back to the 2000s, you had the Pistons were in the mix for like 6 years in a row in the East, right? The Lakers had 2 different runs. There's always people that have runs. I was looking because we're taping the over-under spot in 2 weeks, and I was looking at the East. You can come up with the first 7 in the East. The rest of the teams in the East, it's brutal. There's actually feels like there's potentially more bad teams than we've had in a while. You could potentially get up to 10 bad teams in a 30-team league, which I can't remember that. And some of them are bad by design. Other of them are just kind of too young or they're poorly designed. But it feels like the bottom part of the league is going to be really bottomy this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, you have the Nets, the Wizards, no offense to our friend Joe, Toronto Raptors, the Hornets, the Bulls, the Pistons.
But maybe the Hawks. The Hawks are freaking weird.
And it skews to the East, which means your team and the Knicks or the Pacers, whoever really clicks below the Celtics line, is going to have a lot of easy wins too. So I think that this is good for the Boston Celtics because this is distributed on the eastern half of the bracket and means a lot regular season wins. You can rest Porzingis, you can rest your guys, you can defend your title.
It better rest Porzingis
because you're going to have a lot of games in Charlotte, Chicago, in Detroit and Toronto to win with 2 of your guys resting, and I think that's going to lend itself. So if I had to predict the parity thing, I think your team is in really good position in Boston to be favored, not just this year, but the next few years to come out of the Eastern Conference, barring any drama up there.
Kirk, that makes me super happy. I'm glad you think that. Yeah. All right. FanDuel, Philly, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Orlando, Indiana, Miami, Knicks, right? You got those 7. Then it quickly goes into Toronto, Atlanta, Charlotte, Chicago, Detroit, Washington, Brooklyn as the make the playoffs odds descend. Brooklyn is 40-1 to make the playoffs on FanDuel, right? But then you go up to Atlanta, they're plus 152, and that's as an 8 seed. So even FanDuel's like, we don't fucking know who's going to be the 8th seed. Like, so it tells me one of those teams, and that's what I have to figure out before we do the over-under. One of those teams is going to be this team's a little better than we thought team. And I don't know who that is yet. Like, it might be Charlotte. I don't know.
I like Charlotte there, but I don't know if those odds account for the Ben Simmons workout videos that we all saw a couple weeks ago.
Feeling great. I read an article yesterday that it's starting point guard it's a battle between him and Schroeder. We don't know. We're just going to have training camp to figure out who grabs it. I'm going to bet on Schroeder. I'm going to put that money down now. I will say if Ben Simmons comes back to 78% of what we've seen from Ben Simmons, it could be Brooklyn just by default. What you just listed there, like that, he would become one of the better players in that group of troubled Eastern Conference. But didn't
teams.
They do the thing where they did that? They did the trades over the summer because they wanted. They basically were saying we want our pick to be good this year, and we want to own it. So that makes me suspicious. The win for them would be to be able to trade Ben Simmons. Right? To be able to deal him as an expiring and be like, hey, look at this guy. Used to be an all defense guy. What's your fourth trend?
My fourth trend is American superstars, Bill Simmons, are washed.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Washed.
It's been 6 full years since a hardworking American has won the NBA MVP award, Bill.
Wow.
6 years. It's, as an American myself, it's one of the most alarming trends in basketball, growing up watching Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley, Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. This was our game. This was our sport. And it was represented at the very top of the league. Now, if you look at MVP odds or you look at who's going to be first team All NBA, you see a bunch of guys who weren't born in our country. And I kid a little bit here, but this is remarkable. This is basketball becoming soccer. This is a global sport. It's been.
I don't
awesome
feel like you're kidding.
I'm
about to start humming "God Bless America."
But there's a path where there's not an American MVP in the 2020s, and we're on it. And we're on it through this season, unless somebody like Jalen Brunson, Jason Tatum upsets the other 5 guys who are in front of them for MVP, who are all foreign born, including SGA. A lot of people take credit for him in our country. He's Canadian. Yeah. But I think it is one of the more interesting trends. We saw it in Paris. We narrowly escaped a Serbia game with one of the best Olympic rosters we've ever put together. We narrowly escaped a French game with that same roster. This game is global now, and it's showing up at the top award that we give out in pro basketball.
FanDuel has Luka as the favorite at plus 380, Jokic 4-1, Shea 5-1, Embiid plus 750, Giannis plus 850, and then Brunson's 10-1, Edwards is 11-1. So there's not an American player with single-digit MVP odds anymore.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. And as we've said 3 times on the segment already, it's like Wemby's still coming. I don't think he's going to be a factor this year. Yeah. But when we look out in the trend space deeper into the 2020s, I think the Wemby MVP futures for 2028 are relevant and 2029. And I really think we could see a full decade Bill Simmons. And this is where I put Book of Basketball Bill up on here. This is remarkable, dude. This is an American league for the last 80 years for the most part. Yeah. And one of the biggest trends is it's no longer the case.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, we haven't even seen the best version of Luka yet.
No.
He has not won an MVP. There's no scenario where he doesn't win an MVP this decade if he doesn't get hurt. Jokic is still in his prime. Wemby's coming. And you're looking at Edwards and Tatum. like a maybe keep your fingers crossed for John Morant having like a 2011 Derrick Rose season, lifting up a team, maybe 10 wins higher than they should be. But
Devin Booker,
that,
maybe. Yeah, it's slim
Booker
pickings. Yeah, and maybe it's Cooper Flag is our is but who knows what it's going to be, dude. But it is remarkable, and it's one of the biggest trends again since we were working together at Grantland. This is crazy. Yeah, before 2019, only 3 international players had ever won the award.
Should we just claim Embiid? I mean, he did play for Team USA. Maybe we can claim him.
Yeah, I put this on my Instagram, and I have the flags of all the nationalities of the guys, and a bunch of people in the comments were like, dude, Embiid's American. He played for Team USA today. Yeah. I'm like, well, I don't know if the people in Cameroon would claim he's American, but I think, no, Embiid, all kidding aside.
American born.
We don't need charity. We're freaking America. Like, this is crazy.
I love this. This is the most excited I've been since Rocky IV was on 2 nights ago, and I watched Stallone in the Cold War again. What's your last trend?
My last trend is related, and it's related again to the decade. It is the center position is back. The center's big men are back, and we sort of alluded to this earlier with the physicality segment. But Roy Hibbert was an all-star and then out of the league in 2 years. Draymond Green had revolutionized the center position, and now we see a league full of Embiids.
That's not fair. You can't credit Draymond. It was Ante Zizic. Wasn't that his name?
Hawks. Yeah, the Hawks.
The Hawks guy?
Mike Budenholzer ended Roy Hibbert's career in the playoffs.
They spotted that big, bulky, whatever country that dude was from, and he started hitting threes, and it completely upended the playoffs.
That's a great scene for the European big documentary that we should make is Zizic taking down Roy Hibbert.
Was that who it is? Now I got to look this up. I might be mixing up.
Antic. Pero Antic.
That's who it was. I couldn't remember his name. Pero Antic.
I can't believe I did it. But yeah, Bud deserves credit for saying, hey, guys, our center should be able to shoot too. And if your center can't shoot and can't defend in the pick and roll, and can't pass, like, time's running out. And the credit goes to Giannis, Porzingis, Embiid, and Jokic for bringing skills to the 5-man and saying, look, size is still the most important thing you can have in this dumb game we're all obsessed with. But if I can dribble, pass, and shoot too, I'm going to be a problem. And so big men are back. And I think more valuable than ever if they can put it together. If you can dribble, pass, and shoot in that position group, and obviously rebound, you are among the most valuable players in the sport. And I don't think that's what we were talking about 5 years ago, 7 years ago, when we were chasing Roy Hibbert out of the NBA, and when Zebo stopped posting up, and Draymond was running up and down the court at 6'6", being a center.
Yeah.
So I think that the another big trend is the return of revenge of the girth, as I like to say. The center position is back.
Yeah, it feels like it would be really hard to win a title unless you at least had an answer for an awesome center at some point in the 4 rounds.
The Celtics are so big, right?
Yeah.
That's not small ball. Small ball's not going anywhere. Yeah, you need Giannis, you need Jokic, you need Porzingis. You need these guys that can bang around and rebound. And you, again, as the historian of the game, know that this league was owned by these guys for its first half,
for better and worse.
I think they
won
was
just big centers battling like 2 dinosaurs against each other as everyone else stood around.
It was for worse. It was, and we opened up the game with a 3-point shot, and that led to a crisis at the center position. But instead of going away peacefully, they learned how to dribble, pass, and shoot and get a little quicker. And they didn't go quietly. In fact, they're winning MVPs. And I think the last 4 MVPs are centers, because Jokic has won 3 and Embiid has won 4. And we haven't had a decade, Bill, with 4 centers winning the MVP since the 70s.
Wow.
So they're not only back, they're back in a way that in my lifetime is unusual at the very top of the league.
2 other things I think with that. One is the Curry generation influence and just these big guys coming up, shooting threes when they were kids or teenagers and just being more comfortable for it. But I mean, the greatest guy to look at for this is Al Horford.
Yeah.
who I think until like 2016, I don't think he took any threes. And then if you go look at his basketball reference, there's all of a sudden this 1 year and it just flips. And from that point on, he's completely reinvented himself as this different type of guy. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, I think as our stuff got more sophisticated with where people were scoring and not scoring, what plays worked and didn't work, you watch, and I obviously during the summer, I'm watching old basketball sometimes because I just miss basketball. And you watch some of the offense they ran back then. It's unbelievable now to watch. They're just dumping into some big guy. There's no spacing at all. There's two guys on his side of the court. He's immediately swarmed. He tries to do like a drop step anyway in traffic. And we were just kind of doing basketball incorrectly.
Yeah,
and
it was
so
like,
I think we just solved that, and that probably helped the centers.
Yeah, opening up the game. I mean, Dirk is another person who really just sort of led by example. It's like, oh, guys, I'm pretty good at rebounding and blocking shots, but I'm very good at shooting the ball, and nobody can block it. And I can space the floor and open it up for Jason Kidd to do whatever he wants over here on offense. And I think that changed a lot of things. Brooke Lopez and Al Horford revolutionized their games on the fly to fit
Lopez
in.
is another one. He never shot threes.
Yeah, both Lopez and Horford were all-stars without ever making threes, and then became NBA champions and extended their careers and made a lot more money. Because they were like, Bud was involved with Brooke Lopez too. He started that in Brooklyn, but when he got to Milwaukee, obviously spaced the floor for Giannis to just come in and pummel people with the basketball. So I think that's a huge part of it, dude, for sure.
Well, Bud's now Nurkic is his biggest project yet. He's probably got Nurkic. Just, can you make these two shots from these two spots for me? Because this is my thing, man. Please do it.
I can tell you a little insider stuff there with the Suns. They are trying to get Nurkic to shoot threes. Whether that'll work or not is one of the more interesting things we'll get to witness early this season, maybe even in the preseason. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Nurk trying to shoot threes in preseason basketball. So, Bud has revolutionized that too. He obviously had Al Horford in Atlanta as well.
Kirk Goldsberry, without spoiling anything next week, it's good to have you in our universe, and look forward to hearing more from you on different places that might involve the Ringer.
Oh, man, that would be great. Let's try to make it happen, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
All right, we'll try. I'm going to work on it right now. Kirk, good to see you.